The wind carried needles of snow that stung my face. But inside the town hall, the air was thick and hot with judgment. They were auctioning off picnic baskets for the War Orphans Fund, a good cause, but I knew my basket wouldn't fetch much. I was Abigail Murray, the plump widow from the edge of town, an object of pity and sometimes ridicule. Mayor Patterson called my name. Next up, a mystery picnic basket from Mrs. Abigail Murray. A hush fell, not of anticipation, of something else, something cold. I stepped forward, forcing a smile. My heart hammered against my ribs. "We'll start the bidding at $2, the mayor said, his voice weak. Silence. He tried again. $1 then? From the back, a man's voice, loud enough for everyone to hear. Who'd pay good money for dinner with the fat widow? Laughter rippled through the hall, sharp and cruel. My cheeks burned hot with shame, but I held my head high. 5 years of this had taught me how to build armor from my own dignity, even when it felt like it was about to crack. I stared at a crack in the wall, focusing on the wood grain, trying to make the faces, the whispers, the laughter all disappear. I would not cry, not here. 50 silver dollars. The voice sliced through the noise like a razor, deep, confident, final. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. A man stepped out from the shadows, tall, broad, his face weathered by a life lived outdoors. It was Caleb Thornton. I knew the name. Everyone did. He ran the Red Feather Sheep Ranch, a place miles outside of town. A man of few words and even fewer appearances. A widower like me. $50, the mayor stammered. It was a month's wages. More than a month's wages for most men there. Caleb Thornton just nodded, his eyes fixed on me. Not the basket. Me. He looked at me with an intensity that was unnerving but not unkind. It was like he was seeing right through the armor, right down to the woman hiding inside. Sold! The mayor shouted, banging his gavel with a little too much force. To Mr. Caleb Thornton for $50. I stepped down from the stage, clutching my basket like a shield. Caleb met me at the bottom of the steps. His face was a mask, impossible to read. Thank you, Mr. Thornton, I managed to say, my voice a quiet tremor. Your generosity is admirable. He took the basket. His calloused fingers brushed against mine, a spark of warmth in the cold, cruel room. I've heard your cinnamon bread is worth every penny, he said, his voice so low only I could hear. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and humiliation, and a strange, unfamiliar flicker of something else. Something I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. I slipped out of the auction before the dancing started. I couldn't bear another night of being a wallflower, of watching other people live their lives, while mine felt like it had ended when my husband Matthew died. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the town in a clean, quiet white. It softened the hard edges of the world, but it couldn't soften the ache in my heart. My little house was at the very edge of town, the last light before the wilderness took over. It was a lonely place. Halfway home, I heard horse hooves crunching in the snow behind me. I turned. It was him, Caleb Thornton, on a large bay horse, steam pluming from its nostrils. Mrs. Murray, he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet night, it's coming down harder. May I offer you a ride? I hesitated. The gossip would be merciless. The widow and the rancher alone in the dark. But the thought of another 20 minutes in the biting cold was just as bad. Thank you, but I'm nearly there. I'd like to speak with you anyway, he said, swinging down from the saddle in one smooth motion. A business matter. Business? With me? What possible business could this man have with the town widow? Now I was intrigued. I'll walk with you, he said, leading his horse. We walked in silence for a few minutes. The only sound was the snow under our feet. He was even taller up close, a solid, grounding presence in the swirling snow. As we reached my porch, I couldn't stand the suspense any longer. What business could you have with me, Mr. Thornton? He tied his horse to the railing, his movements deliberate and sure. I have a proposition for you, Mrs. Murray. May we speak inside? Every rule of propriety screamed no. A widow alone in her house, with a man who was not family. But the cold was seeping into my bones, and my curiosity was a fire in my gut. I unlocked the door. Inside, my house was small but clean. I stoked the fire in the stove, my back to him, trying to gather my thoughts. "I'll be direct, Mrs. Murray," he said, his voice making me jump. He was still standing, holding his hat in his hands. "I need a wife." The fire poker slipped from my grasp, clattering against the hearth. I spun around, sure I had misheard. "Pardon?" "Not in the traditional sense," he clarified, his expression unchanged. He spoke as if he were discussing the price of wool. "I need someone to care for my daughter. Sophia, she's 8, she has severe asthma, and needs more attention than I can give her while running the ranch." My mind was reeling. A marriage proposal from this stranger. "And you're telling me this because—" "I'm proposing an arrangement," he said, his voice flat and businesslike. "A marriage in name only. You would care for Sophia, run the house. In exchange, I would provide for you. Settle your husband's debts." The room tilted. "How do you know about my debts?" "This is a small town, Mrs. Murray. I know the bank is threatening to foreclose on this house." The shame was back, hot and suffocating. Of course he knew. Everyone knew. "So this is charity? A pity marriage?" "No," he said, his gaze steady. "It's a solution. I need help. You need security. It's practical." I turned to the window, watching the snow fall, thinking of the foreclosure notice sitting on my desk. The final warning. "Why me?" I whispered. "There are younger, prettier women." "I've tried housekeepers. They don't stay." "Sophia needs consistency," he said. Then he delivered the final, stunning blow. "And you were a nurse during the war. You have medical knowledge." I spun back to face him. "How did you know that?" "Your husband mentioned it once, years ago." "Matthew." The memory was a sharp pain in my chest. "You knew my husband?" "Not well. We spoke a few times." He set his hat on the table. "Think about it. I'll return tomorrow for your decision." He moved to the door, then paused. "This isn't about love or companionship. I had that once. I'm not looking for it again. This is a marriage of convenience. You would have your own room, your own privacy." He left. I stood in the middle of my small kitchen. The world turned upside down. Marriage. To a man I didn't know. A life I couldn't imagine. But the alternative was losing this house. The last piece of Matthew I had left. The foreclosure notice on my desk seemed to mock me. Outside, the snow fell, covering everything in a fresh, clean slate. By morning, I had to decide. Could my life be wiped clean too? Could I dare to step into the unknown? I barely slept. The man's proposition echoed in my head. A business arrangement. He needed a caregiver for his daughter. I needed a home. It was simple, and yet it wasn't. My marriage to Matthew had been born of love and poetry. This would be a contract signed in desperation. A knock at the door startled me. It was Caleb Thornton, and he wasn't alone. A small girl stood beside him, bundled in a coat far too large for her. Her eyes, the same stormy gray as her father's, peered at me from over a thick scarf. "Mrs. Murray," Caleb said, "this is my daughter, Sophia." My heart did a strange little flip. "Hello, Sophia," I said, smiling gently. "Would you like to come in for some hot chocolate?" She looked to her father, who nodded. Inside, she moved with a quiet, careful grace, her breathing soft and measured. She was drawn to my small bookshelf. "Do you like books?" I asked. She nodded, her voice a whisper. "Father reads to me, when he's not too tired." From the window, Caleb didn't turn, but I saw his shoulders tense. I served the hot chocolate. Sophia took a careful sip. "This is good," she said quietly. "Better than Maggie's." "Maggie was our last housekeeper," Caleb explained, finally turning around. "She left 2 weeks ago." Sophia stared into her mug. "She said I was too much trouble," she said, her voice flat, "because of my breathing." The words, spoken with such childish acceptance, ignited a fierce, protective fire in my chest. "Well," I said, sitting across from her, "I was a nurse. I've helped people with all sorts of breathing troubles." Her eyes flickered with interest. Father said you might teach me to make cinnamon bread if you came to live with us. I glanced at Caleb. He had the good grace to look slightly embarrassed. I may have mentioned the possibility, he admitted. They stayed for an hour. I showed Sophia my pressed flowers, the quilt I was mending. She was quiet, but her initial wariness began to melt away. When they left, she stopped at the door. Will you come to Red Feather? She asked, her solemn eyes searching my face. The question was more than just words. It was a child's plea. I looked at Caleb. He was watching his daughter with an expression I hadn't seen before. Vulnerable. I haven't decided yet, I answered honestly. I hope you do, she said, before turning to walk into the snow. After they were gone, the house felt cavernous, empty. Sophia's soft voice had filled a silence I hadn't even realized was there. I thought of her careful movements, her quiet acceptance of being too much trouble. I thought of Caleb's watchful, silent care, and I thought of the foreclosure notice. My options were dwindling. By evening, I had made my decision. That night, I opened the small trunk at the foot of my bed. Inside, wrapped in linen, was my wedding photograph. Matthew and I, young, hopeful, so full of love. He had seen beauty in me when others saw only a plain, plump woman. The town called him a hero, but they hadn't seen the nightmares that haunted him after the war. They didn't know the truth of how he died. A hero's death, they'd called it, an accident. Only I knew he had chosen to leave a world that had become too painful for him. I took the photograph outside into the biting cold. Under the peach tree Matthew had planted, I dug a small hole in the frozen earth. I placed the photograph inside and covered it with snow. Goodbye, my lovin', I whispered. I have to find a new path now. I was leaving this part of my life behind, buried in the soil of the home we had shared. Tomorrow I would become Mrs. Caleb Thornton, a wife in name only. It was a contract, I told myself, nothing more. But as I packed my few belongings, I couldn't shake the image of a little girl's solemn face, a girl who just wanted someone to not see her as a burden. And I wondered if maybe, just maybe, I was walking towards something more than just a solution. The wedding was a 10-minute affair in the judge's office. No flowers, no music. Just a piece of paper that tied my life to a stranger's. Caleb wore a black suit that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. He didn't kiss me. He shook my hand. Then he handed me an envelope. Your husband's debts, he said. They've been settled. Relief warred with a strange sort of shame. I had been bought and paid for. We picked up Sophia from the general store. She had a small gift for me, a little carved wooden bird, painted red. It's a cardinal, she said, her voice soft. They stay through the winter. The unspoken message was clear. She hoped I would stay too. The drive to Red Feather Ranch was long and silent. The valley opened up before us, vast and beautiful, even under a blanket of snow. The farmhouse was large, solid, built to withstand anything the Montana wilderness could throw at it. Caleb helped me down from the wagon. Welcome to Red Feather, Mrs. Thornton, he said formally. The name sounded foreign on my own ears. The house inside was just as stark as the man who owned it. Spacious but empty of warmth. No pictures, no decorations. Just functional, sturdy furniture. It was a house, not a home. He showed me to my room. It was clean, but impersonal. A place to sleep, not to live. My room is at the end of the hall, he said, his voice flat. Sophia's is between ours. The room at the far end remains closed. It was my late wife's study. Please respect that. Another secret, another locked door in this man's life. After he left, Sophia appeared in my doorway. I want to show you something, she whispered. She led me to a small garden behind the house, now dormant under the snow. In the center was a single wooden bench. This is my thinking spot, she said. Mother planted flowers here. Father keeps the path cleared so I can still come out. Evidence of his love was everywhere, quiet and steady. Will you plant flowers when spring comes? Sophia asked, her gray eyes searching mine. It was another test, a question of permanence. I'd like that very much, I said. We can choose them together. For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. Back in the kitchen, her breathing hitched, a tiny, almost inaudible wheeze. Do you have medicine? I asked casually. She pointed to a cabinet. I found the herbs and a tincture from the doctor. I knew these plants from my nursing days. As I prepared a soothing tea, Caleb came in, snow dusting his shoulders. His eyes went straight to the medicinal tea, then to Sophia. Her breathing, he stated. Just a slight wheeze, I assured him. We were in the garden. A muscle in his jaw tightened. Perhaps you should rest before supper, Sophia. She nodded, a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. After she'd gone upstairs, Caleb stood awkwardly in the kitchen, a stranger in his own home. Her asthma worsens in the cold, he said finally. I know, I replied. The tea will help. He watched me move around the kitchen, a space I was already starting to claim as my own. You seem comfortable here. A kitchen is a kitchen, I said. It's nice to cook for more than just myself again. Something in his expression eased, just for a moment. I'll build up the fire, he said, turning to leave. As the snow began to fall outside, I chopped vegetables for a stew. The house was cold and empty, but the smell of cooking food was a start. It was a beginning. Not the life I had dreamed of, but a life nonetheless. That night the storm raged outside. Inside, the silence was just as loud. Caleb and I sat by the fire, two strangers bound by a contract, separated by an invisible wall. Her breathing seems better, I said, just to break the quiet. He nodded, not looking up from his ledger. Clara used to sing to her. It was the first time he'd said her name, his late wife, the ghost that haunted this house. I want to be clear about my expectations, he said, finally closing his book. The housekeepers before you, they found the midnight treatments burdensome. I was a war nurse, Caleb, I reminded him. I can manage. He seemed satisfied. He stood, adding a log to the fire, his back to me. There's something else you should know about Clara, he said, his voice low. The town believes she died of consumption. That's what I told them. What I told Sophia. He paused, the firelight casting long shadows on the wall. But that's not what happened. I held my breath. He turned to face me, his expression grim. Clara didn't die, he said, the words dropping like stones into the quiet room. She left us. 3 years ago, she ran away with a fur trader. The twist was like a punch to the gut. The perfect deceased wife wasn't dead at all. She had abandoned her husband. She had abandoned her sick child. I tell you this, Caleb continued, a muscle working in his jaw, so you understand why Sophia is so cautious. She fears abandonment. It all clicked into place. His stoicism, the locked room, the lie he told his own daughter, a kindness to shield her from a much crueler truth. He had built a fortress around his daughter's heart, and he had just given me the key. As I went up to my room that night, I wondered what kind of woman would leave her own child. What kind of life had been so unbearable that she had to run from it? And I realized, with a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold, that Red Feather Ranch was built on a foundation of secrets, and I was now standing right in the middle of them. I woke in the dead of night to a sound that chilled me to the bone. Labored breathing, a desperate wheezing gasp for air. For a second, I was back in the war, in a field hospital filled with dying men. Then I remembered. I was at Red Feather, and that sound was coming from Sophia's room. I found her sitting bolt upright in bed, her small body rigid, her face a mask of terror. She was fighting for every breath and losing. Sophia, I'm here, I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the panic I felt. Try to stay calm. This was a full-blown asthma attack. Where's your father? Checking. Sheep, she gasped. Storm. Of course, the blizzard. I was on my own. My nursing instincts took over. I propped her up with pillows, then rushed to prepare a steaming basin with eucalyptus oil. I created a small tent over her head with a towel. Breathe the steam, I instructed gently. While she inhaled, I found the doctor's tincture, my hands steady as I measured the dose. Slowly, painfully, her breathing began to ease. The desperate gasps softened into wheezes, then into something resembling normal breaths. She slumped against me, exhausted. I rubbed her back in slow, soothing circles, humming an old lullaby. My mother used to hum that, she whispered, her voice raspy. I paused. Did she? Before she got sick, Sophia murmured, her eyes heavy with sleep. You helped me. That's what I'm here for, I said softly. Maggie said it was a bother. She confided, her defenses down. She said no man was worth midnight troubles. Anger, hot and fierce, surged through me. Well, Maggie was wrong, I said firmly. You are not a bother, Sophia. Not ever. As she drifted off to sleep, the door creaked open. Caleb stood there, covered in snow, his face etched with worry. The worry melted into relief when he saw Sophia sleeping peacefully. She had an attack, I said quietly. It's past. He moved to the bed, his large, rough hand gently touching her forehead. I should have been here, he said, his voice thick with guilt. You were tending your flock, I said, and I was here. Isn't that why you brought me to Red Feather? He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if for the first time, as if he was seeing past the plain, plump widow and seeing someone else, someone strong, someone capable. Yes, he acknowledged, his voice low. It is. As I turned to leave, he spoke again. You handled it well, better than the others. It wasn't much, but from this man, it was everything. Back in my own room, I didn't sleep. I watched the blizzard rage, feeling the weight of the responsibility I had taken on. But it wasn't a burden. For the first time in years, I felt needed. I had a purpose. This strange, broken family, built on a contract and a lie, was starting to feel like something real. As the weeks passed, a quiet rhythm settled over Red Feather. I learned that Caleb liked his coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe, and that Sophia had a secret love for cinnamon. The house, once so cold and empty, began to fill with the smells of baking bread and the sound of Sophia's soft laughter. She was changing. The solemn, cautious child was slowly being replaced by a girl who smiled, who asked questions, who was starting to believe she wasn't a burden. But the secrets of the house remained. Caleb still disappeared some evenings, returning late, the scent of cold night air clinging to him. The door at the end of the hall remained locked. One afternoon, a buggy pulled up to the house. It was Eleanor Jenkins, the owner of the general store, a woman with a stare that could curdle milk. So, it's true, she said, sizing me up. Caleb Thornton has taken a new wife. She marched into my kitchen like she owned the place. I didn't realize when Caleb said he was hiring help, he meant a wife. My arrangements are my own business, Eleanor, Caleb said, appearing in the doorway. When they involve Sophia, they become my business, she shot back. She turned her sharp eyes on me. This town looks after its own, Mrs. Thornton. Sophia has already lost one mother. We wouldn't want to see her get attached to someone who might not stay. The barb hit its mark, but I kept my voice steady. I have no intention of leaving, Mrs. Jenkins. Sophia's welfare is my primary concern. She said, unconvinced. Clara said something similar once. The name dropped into the room like a stone. That's enough, Eleanor, Caleb warned, his voice dangerously quiet. After she left, a tense silence filled the kitchen. I apologize for Eleanor, Caleb said. She's protective of Sophia. She seems formidable, I admitted. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Most people find her terrifying. I was a war nurse, I reminded him. I've faced down generals. Mrs. Jenkins is hardly terrifying. The smile became real then, just for a second, transforming his hard face into something boyish and unguarded. The moment passed as quickly as it came, but it left a warmth in its wake. That Sunday we went to church. It was my first time in town as Mrs. Thornton. I could feel the eyes on us, hear the whispers, but there were welcoming smiles too. After the service, I saw Caleb talking to a man near the steps. His face was grim, his posture tense. And then another man approached our small group. He was handsome, well-dressed, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ah, the Thorntons, he said, his voice smooth as silk. Edmund Bradford, I own the bank. Caleb's body went rigid. I've been meaning to speak with you, Thornton, Bradford said, his smile tightening. About your loan payment. It's overdue. I'll have it by the end of the month, Penuno, Caleb said, his voice tight. Of course, Bradford purred. But there was a threat coiled beneath the pleasantries. I saw Sophia shrink back, her small face filled with a fear that was older than her years. The ride home was silent. Is everything all right? I finally asked. Bradford is not a man to be trusted, Caleb said, his eyes fixed on the road. It would be best if you avoided him. He wouldn't say more, but I knew there was a story there, another secret locked away behind his stoic silence. Red Feather was a place of ghosts and locked doors, and I was starting to realize that some of them were more dangerous than others. Edmund Bradford was not just a banker, he was an enemy, and he had his sights set on Caleb, and on us. One snowy afternoon, as a blizzard howled outside, Sophia looked up from her reading. Abigail, she said, her voice small, will you teach me to make cinnamon bread, like you promised? It was more than a request for a baking lesson. It was a bridge, an invitation into a part of her life her own mother had never occupied. The next morning, the kitchen was filled with the warm scent of yeast and cinnamon. Sophia's face was smudged with flour, her brow furrowed in concentration as she kneaded the dough. Mother never baked, she said suddenly. She said the flour made her sneeze. She paused, her small hands still working the dough. She was beautiful. Everyone said so. Father has a picture, but he keeps it in the locked room. Then the words that broke my heart. She said I was too difficult sometimes because of my breathing. I knelt down beside her. Your breathing is not your fault, Sophia. It's just a part of who you are. It doesn't make you difficult. She looked at me, her gray eyes so serious. Like the lambs that are born early, she said. Father says they're not trouble, just need extra help to grow strong. Exactly like that, I said, my voice thick. When Caleb walked in, he stopped dead in the doorway. He stared at Sophia, who was laughing as I drizzled icing on the warm bread, her face alight with a joy I'd never seen before. He took a bite, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. Delicious, he pronounced. Best I've ever tasted. Sophia beamed. Later, after she'd gone upstairs, Caleb lingered in the kitchen. I haven't seen her smile like that in years, he said quietly. She's lighter since you came. He looked at me, his gaze direct. I appreciate what you've done. For Sophia, for this house, for making it feel like a home again. The simple, honest words were a gift. That night I couldn't sleep. I was drawn downstairs by a faint, haunting sound. Music, a violin, playing a melody filled with a deep, aching sadness. I followed the sound to the barn. The door was slightly ajar. Peeking inside, I saw him. Caleb standing alone in an empty stall, his eyes closed, the violin tucked under his chin, playing with a skill and a passion that stole my breath. This stoic, practical rancher was a musician, an artist, a man with a soul full of sorrow he could only express through his music. I stumbled backward, knocking over a bucket. The music stopped. The door swung open. He stood there, framed in the lantern light, looking surprised and strangely embarrassed. I heard the music, I whispered. It was beautiful. It helps me think, he said simply. Clara hated it, said it made her melancholy. Another piece of the puzzle, another glimpse into the life he'd lived before. He led me back to the house. He built up the fire and, without a word, began to play again. Not just for himself this time, for me. The music filled the small, warm room, speaking of loss, but also of resilience, of hope. When the last note faded, he lowered the violin. The mask was gone. I saw the man beneath, vulnerable and open. Thank you, I whispered. As I turned to go to my room, he spoke my name. Abigail. I stopped. What you've done here, it matters. He met my gaze across the firelit room. I want you to know that. Upstairs, I looked out at the moonlit snow. This marriage had started as a contract, a practical solution, but it was becoming something else. I was starting to care for this broken man and his lonely child in a way that had nothing to do with practicality. I had stumbled into a house of secrets, but I was beginning to realize I had also stumbled into a place that felt impossibly like home, and I was falling for the man who had brought me here. A February thaw melted the snow, revealing the promise of spring underneath. While cleaning, I found it, a small brass key hidden on a high shelf. Sophia saw it in my hand. Maybe it goes to the locked room, she whispered. My heart hammered. The room Caleb had forbidden me from entering, his late wife's study. I told myself I would give him the key when he returned, but the key burned a hole in my pocket. The secret of that room called to me. With Sophia napping and Caleb gone, my curiosity won. I stood before the door at the end of the hall, my hand trembling as I slid the key into the lock. It turned, the door swung open. The room was a shrine, a woman's life frozen in time, a delicate desk, shelves of poetry and travel books, and on a small table, a silver-framed photograph. It was Clara. She was breathtakingly beautiful, but her eyes held a restless, discontented look. Next to the photo was a leather-bound journal. I knew I shouldn't. It was an invasion, but I couldn't stop myself. I opened it. Her handwriting was elegant, but the words were poison. Complaints about the isolation, the endless winters, and then the entries that made my blood run cold. She wrote of a handsome fur trader, a man who spoke of Paris and New York, a man who told her she was wasted in this wilderness. March 17th, 1882. I've made my decision. God forgive me, but I cannot stay. Sophia was sleeping when I checked on her. I kissed her forehead. Will she understand someday that I wasn't meant for this life? That some women aren't made to be mothers? I leave this journal as my confession, the final entry. She hadn't died. She had chosen to leave. She had abandoned her child. What are you doing, I gasped, dropping the journal. Sophia stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with confusion. No one is supposed to come in here, she whispered. Guilt washed over me. You're right. I shouldn't have. Her eyes found the photograph. That's Mother, she said. Then she looked at me, her expression crumbling. If I had been different, if my breathing wasn't bad, do you think she wouldn't have gotten sick and died? The blow was physical. She blamed herself. This poor child had carried the weight of her mother's death for years. No, Sophia, I said, kneeling before her, my voice fierce. Your mother's illness had nothing to do with you. Nothing. But I heard her, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes, telling Father she was tired of my attacks, that I was too much trouble. My heart shattered. I pulled her close. As we left the room, I locked the door behind us. Sophia looked up at me, her eyes filled with a wisdom far beyond her years. You won't leave like Mother did, will you? She asked quietly. Even if I'm troublesome, she suspected. She didn't know the whole truth, but she knew the core of it. She had been left. I will not leave you, Sophia, I promised, taking her small hands in mine. Not for any reason, I promise. Good, she said simply, because I would miss you. That evening I gave Caleb the key. He looked from the key to my face, and he knew. You went in the room, he said, his voice flat. Yes, and Sophia found me there. I took a deep breath. Caleb, she thinks she's the reason her mother died. He closed his eyes, a muscle working in his jaw. You read the journal, he stated. Yes, I'm sorry. He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. So now you know. Clara didn't die. She ran away, left her daughter without a word. It was kinder to tell her she was dead, I said softly. Kinder, yes, he said, his voice raw. Better to be the child of a dead mother than an indifferent one. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain he had carried alone for 3 long years. It hasn't been enough. Raising her alone. Not until you came. The admission hung in the air between us, a confession of his own. He pocketed the key. Thank you, he said, his voice thick, for promising Sophia you wouldn't leave. I meant it, I said. I won't. The lie about Clara was a fragile shield, and it was beginning to crack. And the truth hiding underneath was a monster, waiting to devour what was left of this family. Spring arrived, and with it, the first lambs. The ranch came alive with new energy. Sophia blossomed, taking charge of the orphaned lambs, her usual solemnity replaced by a gentle maternal care. The sound of her laughter, once so rare, became a regular melody in the barn. Our fragile arrangement was beginning to feel like a real family, but a shadow loomed, the loan from Bradford's bank. One night, Caleb finally opened up. The flock is fine, he said, his voice grim. It's the loan that concerns me. He explained how Clara's departure, the cost of housekeepers, and a drop in wool prices had put him behind. Bradford is pressing you? I asked. A muscle worked in his jaw. He's offered an alternative. Sell him the North Valley at half its worth. That's extortion, I gasped. My mind raced. I told him about my father, a merchant who had taught me about business, about ledgers. Let me see the books, I said. Maybe a fresh perspective can help. He slid the ledger across the table. It was a gesture of absolute trust. Together, we pored over the numbers. The problem wasn't the ranch, it was the timing. Bradford knew it. He was squeezing Caleb, waiting for him to break. What if you had another source of income? I suggested, an idea sparking. A milk cow. We could sell butter and cheese in town. It's a small thing, but it might be enough to show the bank you're solvent. A slow smile spread across his face, a sight that still made my heart skip a beat. You're quite something, Abigail Thornton, he said softly. That Saturday, we went to town for garden seeds. The air was full of spring and possibility, but the moment we stepped into the general store, the shadow fell again. Be careful, Mrs. Jenkins warned me in a low voice. Bradford's been asking questions about your marriage, your background. He's taking an unusual interest. Then, as if summoned, Bradford himself walked in. His smile was predatory. He made veiled threats about the loan, his eyes lingering on me, then on Sophia. There was something personal in his animosity, something ugly. On the ride home, I asked Caleb why. Why did Bradford hate him so much? Caleb's face was grim. He stared at the road ahead, ensuring Sophia was out of earshot. Because before Clara ran away with the fur trader, he said, his voice tight, she nearly ran away with Bradford. The twist was so shocking I couldn't speak. He was married, Caleb continued, his voice flat. His wife was ill. I discovered their letters, their plans to run away together. I confronted him, threatened to expose him. He backed down. He took a deep breath. 2 months later, Clara left with another man. Bradford's wife died that winter. He's blamed me ever since. For the scandal I prevented. For the woman he lost. And now he wants revenge, I whispered. Yes, Caleb said, his hand finding my arm in a protective gesture. He's looking for a weakness, a way to hurt me. And he thinks he's found one in you, in our marriage. I looked at him, at this strong, silent man who had weathered so much. We'll face him together, I said, my voice firm. His eyes warmed. Together, then, he agreed. A week later, the first bomb dropped. A rumor in town. Someone had seen Clara, in Helena, with a man matching the fur trader's description. The timing is suspicious, Caleb said that night, his face troubled. Just before the loan deadline. You think Bradford is behind this? I wouldn't put it past him, he said, his voice hard as iron. He's capable of anything. Then the second bomb, the one that threatened to destroy everything. The day of Caleb's meeting at the bank, a steady rain was falling. He rode off at dawn, his face set like stone. I spent the day trying to distract Sophia, but a knot of dread was tightening in my stomach. In the afternoon, I heard hoofbeats. It was Caleb, but he wasn't alone. A woman was with him, riding a sleek bay mare. She was elegant, beautiful, even in the rain. And I knew, with a certainty that turned my blood to ice, who she was. Clara Thornton had come home. Caleb's face was a mask of fury and despair. Bradford arranged it, he said, his voice a low growl. She was waiting for me at the bank. Clara dismounted, her movements graceful, her smile as cool as the rain. You must be the new Mrs. Thornton, she said, her voice like honey laced with venom. I'm Clara, the original. The air in the room was thick with tension. Why are you here, Clara? Caleb demanded. Can't a mother visit her child? She asked, her expression one of perfect innocence. I've missed Sophia terribly. You didn't miss her enough to write, he shot back. My situation was complicated, she said with a delicate sigh. Thomas and I have parted ways. I didn't expect to find you remarried. What did you expect? Caleb's voice was raw. That we would wait for you? Then the confrontation I had been dreading. A small sound from the stairs. Sophia stood there, her face a pale canvas of shock. "Mother?" she whispered. Clara's face transformed into a mask of maternal love. "Sophia, darling." But Sophia shrank back. "You died," she said, her voice trembling. "Father said you died." "No, darling," Clara cooed. "I've just been away. I'm back now. For you." Sophia's breathing hitched. "You left," she gasped, her small body starting to tremble. "You left because I was sick, because I was too much trouble." The words, her deepest fear spoken aloud, triggered the attack. She crumpled, fighting for air. I rushed to her side, Caleb right behind me. We worked together, a practiced team, administering her medicine, talking her through it. Clara watched, her perfect face a mixture of shock and something else. Realization, perhaps. Realization that she had been replaced. When the worst had passed, Caleb carried Sophia upstairs. Clara gathered her coat, her composure restored. "I'll return tomorrow," and she said. "We can discuss the arrangements then." "Arrangements?" Caleb questioned from the top of the stairs. Clara paused at the door, a silhouette against the gray rain. "For shared custody, of course," she said, her voice steel. "I am her mother, Caleb. I have rights." After she left, the threat of her words hung in the air. This wasn't a reunion. It was an invasion. Upstairs, Sophia clung to me. "I don't want things like before," she whispered. "I want them like now, with you." Her small voice broke on a sob. "I wish you were my real mother." The simple, heartbreaking words sealed my resolve. This was my child. This was my family. And I would fight for them. When I went back downstairs, Caleb told me the rest. Bradford's final, cruel ultimatum. "He'll extend the loan," Caleb said, his voice dead, "if I agree to sell him the North Valley, at his price. And if you don't?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "He'll back Clara in a custody battle, finance her lawyers, ruin us." It was a perfect, vicious trap. Either way, Bradford would win. He would take Caleb's land, or he would take his child. Caleb looked at me, his eyes blazing with a desperate fire. "I will not let them destroy this," he said. "This life we've built." The "we" was everything. "Then we fight," I said, my voice shaking but full of a strength I didn't know I possessed. "Bradford isn't the only one with leverage. We have the truth." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "I don't deserve you, Abigail Thornton," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he could no longer hide. "You came here as part of a business arrangement. Instead, you've become essential. To Sophia, to me." The confession, finally spoken, was a brand on my heart. "I came here seeking a home," I whispered, "and I found one." He stood, pulling me to my feet. "Whatever happened," he said, his eyes holding mine, "we face it together, as a family." The battle lines were drawn. On one side, a bitter man's revenge and a selfish woman's whim. On our side, a father's love, a child's trust, and a truth that was about to be unleashed like a wildfire. And I, the plain, plump widow, was standing right at the heart of the storm. The next day, Clara returned, her lawyer in tow, a slick man from Helena with a condescending smile. They sat in our parlor laying out their demands for shared custody as if they were dividing property. But we were ready. "Before we discuss arrangements," Caleb said, his voice calm and steady, "there's something you should both see." He placed Clara's leather-bound journal on the table. Clara's face went white. Her lawyer scoffed. "A personal diary? That's hardly admissible." "It's a confession," I said, my voice clear and strong. I opened it to the final entry and began to read aloud. Clara's own words describing her boredom, her resentment of her sick child, her plans to abandon her family for a life of adventure. The lawyer's smile faltered. Clara stared at the journal as if it were a venomous snake. "You see," Caleb said, his voice cold as ice, "the town doesn't believe Clara died of consumption. They will, however, be very interested to learn she abandoned her asthmatic daughter to run off with a fur trader. I can't imagine a judge in this territory would look kindly on that." The threat was clear. Clara's reputation, her very place in society, would be destroyed. But Bradford had one more card to play. He stormed into the house, his face purple with rage. "This changes nothing," he roared. I'll still ruin you, Thornton. I'll call in every loan. I'll see to it you can't sell your wool to a dog catcher. I don't think you will, came a voice from the doorway. It was Mrs. Jenkins, and she wasn't alone. Behind her stood Mr. Miller, the blacksmith, and a dozen other ranchers and townspeople. We've been talking, Bradford, Mrs. Jenkins said, her eyes like chips of flint, about your predatory lending practices, about how you've been squeezing all of us. She held up a sheaf of papers. We've decided to form a cooperative. We'll be pooling our resources, selling our wool together, and we'll be moving our accounts to the bank in Helena. Bradford stared at them, his empire crumbling before his eyes. Then, the final, most important voice was heard. Sophia, who had been listening from the stairs, walked into the room. She didn't look at Clara. She walked straight to me and took my hand. This is my mother, she said, her voice small but unwavering. She looked at Caleb. And this is my family. This is my home. The fight was over. Clara left that day, her beautiful face a mask of defeat. She didn't even say goodbye to Sophia. Bradford's power in the town was broken. He was ruined. That evening the house was quiet. The storm had passed. Caleb found me in the garden, where Sophia and I were planning where to plant the new seeds. He stood beside me, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and rose. It started as a contract, he said, his voice soft. A practical solution, I agreed. He took my hand, his calloused fingers lacing through mine. It felt right. It felt like coming home. It's more than that now, Abigail, he said, turning to face me. It has been for a long time. He didn't have to say the words. I saw it in his eyes. The same love and devotion he gave to his daughter, to his land, was now mine. We had found each other in the wreckage of our past lives. Two broken people who, together, had built something whole and strong. Something real. A family forged not by blood, but by choice, by love. The next spring, the garden bloomed with wild columbine and black-eyed Susans. Sophia's laughter echoed through the valley as bright and clear as the Montana sky. And Red Feather Ranch, once a house of secrets and sorrow, was finally truly a home. What do you think happened to Clara? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of love, loss, and the surprising twists of fate.